So good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here today. For those of you that know me, my name is Fernando Gil Enseñat, former Housing Secretary of Puerto Rico, now probably Chairman of the Board for the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. But today I joined these talks as a member of the Bipartisan Policy Disaster Reports Task Force. I'm honored to be here today as the member of the BPC Task Force. And for those of you that may not be familiar, what the Bipartisan Policy Center, or BPC, stands for, is a policy research and advocacy organization in Washington, D.C., committed to working with members of all parties to achieve long-term policy reforms. As well as you know, Puerto Rico still faces significant obstacles to achieving a full recovery nearly 6 years after Hurricane Maria made landfall. Our experiences here illustrate the challenges that persist in the federal disaster recovery system, and however, it's imperative to look beyond challenges and work to ensure that Puerto Rico and other places like it can benefit from the full promise of recovery. That is what we're here today. This discussion is an opportunity to collectively understand the state of the ongoing recovery, as well as the potential opportunities to make federal disaster assistance to Puerto Rico more timely and equitable, hence impactful. Today, we're honored to be joined by our Governor, Pedro Pierluisi Urrutia, and we'll have the opportunity to hear from him of the state of the disaster recovery here in Puerto Rico and his ideas on how to make a federal disaster response and recovery programs work better for families and communities that need them. He will be joined by an adopted daughter of Puerto Rico, Ms. Pamela Patenot, that is the former United States Department Housing Secretary and Urban Development, and is currently a fellow member of the Disaster Response Task Force, as well as BPC Board of Directors. BPC and the Disaster Reform Task Force appreciate your leadership and the work you both continue to do to promise the disaster recovery Puerto Rico needs. I would also like to have a moment to recognize the presence of the Housing Secretary of Puerto Rico, Mr. William Rodriguez, also the Lieutenant Governor of Puerto Rico, Mr. Omar Marrero, and as well as Blanca Fernandez, who is the Executive Director for the Housing Finance Assistant. And with further ado, please, Ms. Patenot and Governor, join us here. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. ¿Qué pasa? Muy bien.
Good morning, Governor.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to our audience, especially our Lieutenant Governor and our Secretary of Housing and our HFA Director, Blanca. Blanca's right here. We have a viewer audience, too, watching us from around the country, and we are just so delighted, the Bipartisan Policy Center, to be hosting you here, or I suppose you're hosting us, Governor, because we're in your beautiful Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. So, Governor, you've had an amazing career, both in the public and private sectors. 30 years as an attorney, 8 years in the United States House of Representatives. You're the former Attorney General of Puerto Rico, and now about 1,000 days as governor. How has your experience helped shape your views on public policy?
Well, thank you first. Thank you, Pamela, for chairing this event, being part of the Bipartisan Policy Institute, and actually engaging in terms of Puerto Rico's recovery and reconstruction, providing us with recommendations and so on. So I will enjoy this conversation with you. In terms of my background and how it impacts what I do as governor, including overseeing this ongoing reconstruction, I would say that my staff across the board in the Puerto Rico government know that for me it is absolutely indispensable that the Puerto Rico government have an excellent working relationship with the federal administration. It is a top priority for all cabinet members, including those working on the reconstruction, to have regular, if not daily, communication with their counterparts in the U.S. government, and to at all times, ensure that we are doing all we can to expedite the reconstruction while complying with all federal procurement and compliance requirements. So I pride myself of knowing how Washington works, working well with Washington officials, and so that's what I want all my colleagues to do and to, as part of their job. Having said that, my administration came in pretty much, let me figure this out, it was about 3.5 years after Maria, the big hurricane, hit us. So a lot of the work, the preliminary work and the emergency work had been done already by then. I have to say that the creation of Core 3, the Center for the Recovery, Reconstruction, and Resiliency of Puerto Rico was a good idea. I understand that we were following the New Orleans model when we did that. And so Manuel Lavoy, whom I appointed for that job, continued leading Core 3 and improving it, meaning, among other things, streamlining what Core 3 does, reducing the steps before an actual disbursement of federal funds happens. And so I have to say that off the cuff. Another thing that Manuel Lavoy accomplished with my support was to encourage FEMA to speed up what they call the FAST program. FAST program is what FEMA created for the energy, water and sewer, housing, and there's a last category that I am missing at the moment. It's 4 categories of projects. And I have to say that at one point, I was speaking with a top FEMA official, and I said, you know what? This FAST program is not fast enough. We have to do something about this. One area there, and I will not try to belabor this because I know we'll keep talking as we go along, but I'll say one. One area I politely complained about was this EHP process that FEMA goes through, Environmental Historic Preservation Review. And one thing I have pointed out, which I'm not sure has been done already, is for FEMA to rely on that type of work on the part of sophisticated subrecipients or contractors of subrecipients. Let's say, for example, LUMA in the area of transmission and distribution of energy, or the Water and Sewer Authority with its contractors in that area. Now, Genera PR in the generation area. Those are they're sophisticated players that can do that work on their own. And what FEMA's role should be is simply to, review. But review, it's a short review, just ensure. And so I'll stop there. In HUD, what we did is, here is the Secretary of Housing. What he did is, first of all, we were living under an agreement that had been entered into between HUD and Puerto Rico that was very restrictive. And we managed to convince Secretary Fudge to lift that early on in April of last year. And since then, the flow of CDBG, DR funds has improved quite a bit. I'll stop there. One thing we did in those programs in which we were creative was we created the Home Assistance Program. We'll talk about it in a minute, and that has been a total success. We're using CDBG DR funds to not only repair homes that were damaged by Maria, but also make them really resilient by installing solar panels, water cisterns, and batteries on them, which is great. It's another very creative, avant-garde approach on the part of the government of Puerto Rico. And one thing I left out that I am proud about, and I should say, and I'll stop for real now, is what Lavoy started doing with FEMA. He proposed creating the Working Capital Advance Program. FEMA works based on reimbursements, but when you have subrecipients that have cash flow issues, sometimes the projects, even though there's an obligation for them, do not start because the proponent doesn't have the necessary cash flow to hire engineers, architects, or other consultants. So we proposed, and FEMA allowed, giving advances, 25% advance of the cost of the project to subrecipients. Lavoy did that with Core 3 FEMA, and William Rodriguez, our Secretary of Housing, followed those steps, proposed the same to HUD, and now HUD is allowing it for some of the programs. So I'll stop there. So short of it, having an excellent working relationship with the federal government is top priority for my administration. I know that that's happening as we speak. And then being creative as much as we can in the use of federal funds and actually within the rules, it's another thing we've done that I'm proud about.
So Governor, I'm just going to back up for a minute for those that may not be familiar with the level of funding. Puerto Rico has received the largest CDBG DR disaster recovery allocation in the history of supplemental appropriations. 20% of all CDBG DR and CDBG mitigation was awarded to the island, so to the tune of about $20 billion, which Secretary William Rodriguez is overseeing for you. And then in addition to that, tens of billions of dollars in FEMA funds. And I know firsthand that there were massive restrictions on Puerto Rico. In the beginning, there were significant federal delays that were unnecessary. And day one, with your wonderful relationship, I understand you and Secretary Fudge were classmates in the U.S. House of Representatives, were able to tear down that barrier. So I know that's when the real recovery, I would consider that the starting date of the significant long-term recovery here on the island. And I know you touched on some of the things you're very proud of, accomplishments on FEMA, and touched on some of what has been done with the CDBG DR money. But you've received significant praise nationally for the way that you handled COVID, not only keeping the residents of Puerto Rico safe, the visitors. I never felt safer than anywhere arriving in a Puerto Rico airport, and the protocols that you had on visitors. But the HAF program, you mentioned it, and that's the Housing Assistance Fund program, which was funded during COVID to help homeowners stay in their homes. And Puerto Rico was the first to launch the program in the country, the first to exhaust all of the funding. I might say that there's still significant need. But talk to me a little bit about how you were so successful in taking that money and compared to how long it takes to use CDBG DR funding. What was the difference that enabled you to be so successful?
And we have the expert on the topic in the House, because actually the Secretary of State, who heads our fiscal agency, was the point person for handling ARP funds. Their Treasury was the one overseeing the use of those funds. And I have to say that because of the crisis, Congress, the way Congress appropriated for this, gave Treasury a lot of leeway. And Treasury wanted those funds to flow. So the requirements were much more flexible. What we did on our own was to be very strategic in the use of those funds. Other than actual payments to individuals, which, as you know, from unemployment, supplemental unemployment to bonus payments or premium pay for first responders and so on. We did all of that, which happened in the States. But let's talk about things that were different here. For example, we saw that the tourism industry was getting hit badly, or was supposed to get hit badly by the pandemic. And we didn't want that to happen. So we targeted that industry. Let me give you an example. We doubled the budget of Discover Puerto Rico, which is the quasi-public entity that promotes Puerto Rico, from about $25 million a year to $50 million a year. And all of a sudden, you saw ads in media in the States, including TV media and so on, social media, everything, advertising Puerto Rico, because down home, our people were quite good or cooperative in dealing with the pandemic. They took care of themselves. There were masking requirements, but people were wearing masks on their own. And the medical community in Puerto Rico coalesced. We had some anti-vaxxers, but not as many as in the States. So this wasn't politicized. So Puerto Rico was viewed as a safe destination, while the US basically decided not to allow travel abroad. Puerto Rico was viewed in the mainland as a safe place to go to. And so our tourism numbers have been amazing. Ever since the pandemic, even in the midst of the pandemic, and by now, we're breaking records when you compare the number of tourists coming to Puerto Rico, hotel occupancy rates, revenues, tax revenues related to tourism. Everything is like off the charts, even pre-pandemic. So I give you that as an example. Another area we targeted with the use of ARP funds is, for example, entertainment, the entertainment industry in Puerto Rico. And some criticize this. You know, we even gave ARP funds so that Puerto Rico could be part of the New Year's Eve, the New Year's Eve huge event in New York that is also Ryan Seacrest, I think is the name. We became part of that. But this, I'm just giving that as an example. So we were using some of this funding to attract attention to Puerto Rico, which also works for investment purposes. Because as I see it, and Puerto Rico's economy is diversified. Manufacturing is about half of our economy, by the way. Tourism is about 7% as we speak. It is growing. But the way we see tourism is once you come to Puerto Rico, we bet you're going to fall in love with Puerto Rico. And maybe the first time you'll simply visit, but the next time you'll buy a second home. And maybe the third time you'll tell to your company, let's open an affiliate in Puerto Rico, or even set up shop in Puerto Rico, even more relocate to Puerto Rico. All of that can be happening. So, but we were using ARP funds, going back to ARP funds, for that purpose. Also to support cultural institutions in Puerto Rico, because we're very proud of our culture, our heritage, yes, our Spanish roots. That makes us attractive within the US. So we were supporting cultural institutions in Puerto Rico that couldn't get any support during the fiscal crisis that Puerto Rico went through. We did that through our funds. And we also took care of public facilities, natural resources, and so on. I'll stop there. But that tells you what happened is, yes, we have obligated pretty much 95% of the ARP funds already. We probably have spent about 70 to 75% of those funds by now. I'm looking at Omar Marrero to see if he's nodding. He's nodding. And so, but we're proud in this area as well, because we thought out of the box.
So we had talked about the HALF program at the start of this, and some 9,000 families were able to stay in their homes thanks to that program being managed so effectively and efficiently. And what I'm hearing, Governor, is flexibility. You had flexibility with that program that you don't have with the CDBG DR funds, CDBG mitigation funds. The Disaster Recovery Reform Task Force at the Bipartisan Policy Center is laser focused on this. And we'd like to hear from you, what changes, if you could make some changes to the way that the federal government responds with long-term recovery?
Well, I mentioned already the EHP process that FEMA goes through. And I believe that FEMA could delegate more to subrecipients, obviously always ensuring that there's compliance along those lines. In the case of HUD, and this is a topic also with FEMA. In Puerto Rico, a lot of churches got damaged, yet HUD was not allowing the use of CDBG, DR funds, and MID funds for coming up with that match, helping churches so we could provide the 10% match that they have to give for any project that FEMA is funding, okay? And HUD, at our urging, ended up consulting the Justice Department, the U.S. Justice Department. And I understand, this just happened a couple days ago. The U.S. Justice Department gave HUD the green light. So now we'll be able to assist churches that got a lot of damage, not only the church themselves, but also the related entities that provide services to the community at large. Another thing we were doing with FEMA, which is related, we were asking FEMA, since there's this 10% match requirement, we were saying, why not allowing us to give you a global match? Meaning, if I have, just to pick a number, $20 billion yet to spend under Section 428 of the Stafford Act, allow us to come up with the $200 million for the 10% match that the federal government is requiring on us on our own. Simply allow us to fund totally, let's say 20 projects worth $10 million each, so that we comply with the match, and then the rest of the projects, you don't need to be providing them. Why I say this? We were proposing this because since HUD, well, for two reasons. HUD has different requirements than FEMA. So, and when you use HUD funds, CDBG DR funds or CDBG MID funds for the match, you need to comply with HUD requirements while complying with FEMA requirements for the balance, for the 90%. The global match, the beauty of the global match, which I have to say FEMA is allowing for the fast projects, but not for the rest. And I'm insisting that they should allow it for all of the projects. The beauty of it is that you only have to comply with one set of requirements, either FEMA's or HUD's. So it's, that's another tidbit that is still pending that could help. One thing, let me see another one. This is important. I just came from a meeting of governors in the States. And this one, I am proposing on behalf of all governors. FEMA is using in Puerto Rico, what I mentioned before, Section 428 of the Stafford Act. The difference between Section 428 and 406, now I'm looking at Manuel Lavoy, so in case I misspeak, you alert me, is that 428 basically gives you more flexibility so long as you live with a hard cap that FEMA imposes on you on the project. Meaning, once you give FEMA the scope of the work, whatever, you submit the project and so on, and you agree on an estimate of the cost of this project with FEMA, then you get all this funding, and you can actually change the scope of the project along the way, so long as, and even substitute the project for another one, so long as you do not exceed the cost, the hard cap that is imposed on you. It sounds good on principle. Now let me tell you the problem. The estimates in the case of Puerto Rico were agreed on, by and large, end of 2019. And what happened since then? Extraordinary inflation, not foreseen by anybody. Even though when the cost estimates were done, they were looking at inflation, and it was taken into account, and including labor shortage, the cost of labor and so on. Nobody envisioned that we would have the kind of inflation we were having, up to 8% just last year. Now finally it's coming down to 3%. So we've been insisting that FEMA should be taking a hard look back at those estimates and adjusting them for inflation purposes. FEMA would like to see some language coming from Congress. That's where I come in, my background. So I have been approaching appropriators in Congress, in the Senate, so that hopefully whenever when the appropriations bill is approved by Congress, appropriating the funds for FEMA, there's going to be some language in the report that accompanies the bill, basically directing FEMA, adjust the 428 program costs due to inflation throughout the nation. I understand that FEMA is reacting positively to this.
That's wonderful.
And is asking Manuel Lavoy here in Puerto Rico to give FEMA more data to support our request, which is a valid request. Think of it this way. If we were given $100 million for a project back in 2019, probably that means that we only have $80 million today. It's like having, you need to revisit the scope of that project to the tune of about 20%. That's not acceptable. That wasn't the intent. So that's another area where I believe Puerto Rico is contributing to the way these programs work in the nation at large.
And Governor, as you know, the CDBG-DR program is not authorized. It's not a permanent program yet.
You're right.
The federal government has been using it for nearly 30 years. $100 billion has been appropriated by Congress. Are you in support of the program being authorized, becoming a permanent program?
Yes.
So we don't have to rewrite the rules every time we have a disaster?
Loud yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Because we're seeing it with Fiona. I believe William Rodriguez is working on this, trying to get a better, a larger amount for Fiona, which was the hurricane that hit us last September. And I agree. With FEMA, you don't have that issue because FEMA has like a yearly appropriation for all the agency, including its federal disaster programs. And so it's not the same.
And the programs that were developed under Fernando Hill's leadership when he was secretary, and now William implementing the programs, it's one of the most comprehensive recovery programs, certainly with $20 billion, but for economic development, work for housing, obviously affordable housing being a high priority for you, and infrastructure. Recently, I saw you on Morning Joe, and you talked about workforce development. You talked about creating these digital jobs. Is the island ready? Because I think we're just on the verge of seeing massive construction underway. Is the island ready, the workforce ready to take on this much work?
Okay, let me answer that, but let me not forget that I need to talk about something else that we're doing, which is quite creative in trying to fill in the gap in Puerto Rico's inventory of housing for sale for low and moderate income families, okay?
Sure.
I need to tell you that.
Absolutely.
But in terms of workforce, definitely. Puerto Rico is facing the same issue that states are facing in the mainland. We have labor shortage. Our unemployment rate right now is the lowest in our history. It's about 6%. Labor participation, which has always been lower in Puerto Rico, substantially lower than in the mainland, has grown by 5% in the last 2 years. And we have today, as we sit here, 112,000 more jobs in our economy than 2.5 years ago. So what's happening is the economy is growing, finally. For the last couple of years, it had been depressed. It was a long-term recession that we were going through. Finally, it's growing. But businesses, including construction companies, are struggling to find people for the business that they have, unprecedented business. our construction industry, particularly in the civil works, public works area, is at full capacity. I tell you, I know it. Some of the bids, we're struggling to find the contractors, or they tell us, I can do it, but 3 or 4 months down the road. That just happened. We are fixing PR1. This is a big highway in Puerto Rico between Cayey and Salinas. We had to delay it, the announcement and everything for the groundbreaking of the project for 3 or 4 months because the contractor was swamped. Okay, so that's happening. Vivienda, Housing Department, is spending some of the CDBG-DR funding for workforce training for construction laborers, among other areas. And the Associated General Contractors AGC in Puerto Rico is trying to do the same, as well as some construction unions are trying to do the same. I am telling the Highway Authority in Puerto Rico, the Water and Sewer Authority, I'm all for our local contractors, but I'm telling them, make sure that when you come up with these bids, you invite U.S. mainland contractors. One thing I didn't tell you is we raised the minimum wage in Puerto Rico. And when I did that as governor, I had some criticism of coming from the private sector. It lasted very little, not long, because everybody's paying much more than the minimum wage in Puerto Rico, including in the construction area. You know, the wages are way up. By executive order, I am requiring that skilled workers need to be paid $15, a minimum of $15 an hour, which is pretty high for Puerto Rico, in all construction projects using federal funds in Puerto Rico. And so we're doing all we can. I understand some U.S. mainland companies are bidding and are bringing some personnel from the U.S. I know, this is anecdotal, but I know that Puerto Ricans are coming back. I see that migration is leveling. The out-migration is pretty much not happening like years back. The last 2 years, pretty stable. The issue we're facing on migration is our birth rate is too low, which is happening in Europe, in some places in the mainland, in the U.S. mainland. So that's a challenge too. So I agree, that's a challenge, meaning having the capacity to do all this that we have to do in terms of improving our infrastructure from one year to the next. Forget it. In fact, I should say this now. It's a good juncture. People say, oh, this is not going as fast as it should. It's been already 5.5 years since Maria. Well, let me tell them. Compare Puerto Rico with New York and New Jersey after Sandy. Compare Puerto Rico with New Orleans after Katrina. Do that. Even compare Puerto Rico with Florida after Irma. And what you'll see is that timeline is comparable, that we're doing as well or better. So sometimes you get criticism just because people are uninformed. They just simply say, hey, I want this to happen overnight. No, when you look at those places, they have taken up to 15 years to spend all the funding they got from FEMA. I don't say HUD because HUD didn't start this CDBG-DR MID program until recently, you know, it wasn't. But so in the case of Puerto Rico, it's been 5.5 years or so up to now. Easy. It's going to take us 8 more years, could be as much as 10. I hope it's more like 8 to finish spending all the funding that we have available for all kinds of things. Improving highways and repairing highways, water and sewer facilities, the grid. Oh my goodness, our grid, which is a pain. It's one of the few things that keep me awake at night every now and then, among other things. That's the scope. That's really what we're dealing with. But this is top priority for us, and we'll continue pushing the ball. This has taken, I'm convinced, this has taken a life of its own. There's nothing stopping the reconstruction of Puerto Rico. And again, I'm proud of what we've done so far. It's important that we keep pushing, but we'll do so.
And Governor, you want to talk about affordable housing and what you're doing here on the island.
Yeah, look, this is great. Because what we did in housing just recently, look at this. We have an issue in Puerto Rico. Builders are not building what we call social interest housing, affordable housing. And the reason is because there's a law in Puerto Rico that sets a cap. If they want tax incentives to do these projects, which is what we give builders to do affordable housing in Puerto Rico, they need to live with a cap, a hard cap on the cost of each unit they build. Right now, the cap is too low. For single-family homes, it is roughly $140,000. For multifamily units, it is roughly $200,000. I introduced a bill because this was worked at the housing department here, William and the team, and the Home Builders Association working with us, the Builders Association. We introduced a bill raising those caps to basically $200,000, $210,000 for single-family units, and $250,000 for multi-family units. House of Representatives in Puerto Rico approved it. The Senate hasn't. So for whatever reasons, I'm upset about it, but I'm usually tranquilo, like you say. But I am upset about it because I have builders saying I cannot build those homes. We're lacking inventory, which I agree. So what we did, since we're coming up with the programs for the use of the MIT funding, the CDBG mitigation funding, William and the team, at my urging, came up with this program that we're getting proposals. We're about to close the first phase this week, telling builders, we will buy units from you in flood areas or areas where we need to mitigate, where we need to relocate people, and we know that we have people, for example, with vouchers, CDBG, DR vouchers to relocate, and so we basically approached builders and said, we need 200 units in Mayagüez. That's not the number, but whatever. 300 units in Salinas. These are the kinds of units we have. I understand it's 3 bedrooms, two bathrooms, whatever, square feet, probably like 1,500 square feet. And we basically told them, this is the size of the lots. Come up with proposals. Our goal in this first phase is we allocated $1 billion of CDBG MIT funding for this with HUD's blessing. Our goal in this first phase is to at least get proposals for $500 million worth of projects. And I think we will be able to accomplish it. And then we'll do a second round. But if you look, and the hope is, or the goal is, to come up with 3,000 units of affordable housing throughout Puerto Rico, using CDBG MIT funds. I'm not sure whether this is being done in the mainland, but it makes all the sense to do in Puerto Rico.
I think this will be the first time with CDBG mitigation.
Do for that. Another one we did, which HUD had never decided to fund a major highway project because HUD thought that is the Federal Highway Administration or authority.
But it's infrastructure.
So we proposed using CDBG MIT funding for finishing what's called PR10 in Puerto Rico. It's a highway connecting north and south in the center of Puerto Rico. And it's a lifeline because even though it's just 7 kilometers or 8 kilometers long, it is in an area that is mountainous, that it takes much longer to go through existing roads. And after Maria, probably was all blocked. So communities were isolated in that area just because they didn't have a highway like the one we're proposing. Well, HUD gave us the blessing. We are ending now the comment period, the public comment period we did, because an EIS was done for this road way back by the Federal Highway Administration. And you might ask me, and why did the Federal Highway never fund this? It is so costly, this one in particular. It costs $550 million to do. And we get in federal highway funding yearly $150 million. So, I mean, the only way we could do this road is to simply say, let's not do anything else in terms of highways for 4 or 5 years and do PR10. So what we're doing, again, being bold but being real, is like doing a project that has been pending since the late 70s with the CDBG MIT. The short of it is, disasters happen in America, but you have an opportunity to come back, to build back better, working with FEMA, working with HUD. Out of a disaster, you have an opportunity to rebuild your area and make it more resilient, make it more reliable. And that's our goal. And I'm sure it's going to happen.
Governor, I know we're running out of time here, but looking back, so we're fast forward 10 years from now, and you look back on your time as governor, what will you be most proud of in terms of the recovery?
What a question. I'll say something else, but to start, and then I'll answer that.
Okay.
You see, I was in Congress, and I was a proud member of Congress, but there's no difference. I'd rather be governor than a member of Congress. When you're a governor, you can execute, you can accomplish things. Even with all the bureaucracy, every now and then we go through, and we help people from one day to the next, and that makes me so proud, okay? So now, let's talk about whenever. Yes, I stopped being governor, and then I look back. I would say the rebuilding of Puerto Rico would be probably the thing that would make me more proud. To make sure that once I'm done, we have a better, more reliable, resilient Puerto Rico to face anything. It's going to be a better platform for the economic development we want in Puerto Rico. In fact, others say, hey, what's going to happen after this? Oh, then the economy will go down the tubes. They're wrong. All we have to do after, which we're doing right now, is maintaining the assets that we'll have, assets that we didn't have to borrow to build. That's the beauty of these programs. We're not borrowing, we're simply providing 10 cents on the dollar. So I am sure that Puerto Rico will be in a much better position 8 years from now or whenever this reconstruction is done, to continue growing on a sustainable basis. And that's my goal. That's my goal. So I'll do all I can to use every penny of federal funds we have available for this purpose, complying with all relevant requirements. If I do that with my team, that's going to be the best thing I can accomplish as governor.
Well, thank you very much, Governor Pierluisi. On behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Center, the Disaster Recovery Reform Task Force, we are very grateful for your leadership, and thank you for your input on how we can make things better going forward.
Thank you again, Pam, for keeping.
Very much.
Yeah.